Hi folks, HR Funk here. A couple of weeks ago I produced a video where I was reviewing Hot Munition's new 38 Super ammunition, and when I got done with that video it reminded me how much I enjoyed the 38 Super cartridge and how interested I was in it a couple of years ago when I first started to explore it. And if you missed that whole saga, what I was looking for back at that time was a 1911 chambered for the 38 Super cartridge that was more of a plain Jane type of a pistol, similar to what would have been used by the G-men back in the 1930s when they were chasing John Dillinger, Babyface Nelson, and that group. And I started out with a Yama pistol and it just never functioned right, and after a couple of trips back and forth to customer service, I ended up trading that on the pistol you saw in the video where I was testing the Hot Munition's ammunition. And I like that pistol, but it's a very modern rendering of the 1911. And I still kind of would like to have that basic plain Jane 1911 that is similar to the ones used by law enforcement back in the day when they were chasing the famous gangsters during the 1930s and later on for that matter. The 38 Super was used for many years by law enforcement, but it was overshadowed eventually by the 357 Magnum cartridge. In any case, when I went back to Hot Munitions after that review, I asked them if they happened to have a plain Jane 1911 chambered for the 38 Super cartridge that I might be able to test and review. It turns out they had two. One was a brand new unfired Rock Island Armory, and the other was an Iver Johnson. Now I have an RIA 1911 chambered for the 10mm cartridge, and it's a very good pistol, but I'd never had the opportunity to review or even handle an Iver Johnson pistol. So I asked if I could borrow this one, and this is going to be the subject of today's video. This is the Iver Johnson 1911 A1 chambered for the 38 Super cartridge. And I'm very much looking forward to reviewing this and getting it out and shooting it. This is the very pistol that Hot Munitions used to develop their 38 Super ammunition. So it'll be interesting to see how this pistol performs. It obviously has been broken in at this point, but it still is an accurate reflection of the Iver Johnson pistols that are being produced currently. So let's get on with the shop review. Now, as many of you know, Iver Johnson is a name that's been around in the firearms industry since the 1800s. And the company has changed hands many times over the years, and the product line has also changed. The current iteration of Iver Johnson is based in Rockledge, Florida, as you see on the box here. And in 2011, they began importing firearms from manufacturers around the world. The 1911s that are marketed by Iver Johnson are manufactured by Shooters Arms Manufacturing in the Philippines, and as I understand it, these handguns are manufactured to Iver Johnson specifications, and then when they arrive in this country, Iver Johnson does some finish work on these pistols before they ship them out through their distribution chain. When you purchase your Iver Johnson 1911, it comes in this plastic hard case, which is not easy to open. And it comes with a stainless steel 9-round magazine in this case, since this is the 38 Super version of this pistol. It also comes with some of the usual things that you associate with firearms these days, that being paperwork, owner's manuals, and of course the obligatory lock. The owner's manual is a pretty good manual. They've got color photographs in here and quite a bit of explanation on these handguns, so I was rather impressed with the owner's manual. So for anyone that's not familiar with the 1911 pistols, you get some pretty good instructions to come along with them. This handgun, by the way, or maybe I should say this version of the handgun, retails for just under $700, so it's not what I would call a budget 1911, but it certainly doesn't have a price that's commensurate with the high-end premium pistols either. And here's an up-close look at the right-hand side of this 1911 A1 pistol, and it is very easy to distinguish as a 1911 A1 because we have very large numerals there to indicate that. And this is one of the things I don't really care for, and when we see the other side, you'll see the Iver Johnson logo. I would like to see this maybe a little bit more reduced in terms of size. It just seems a little bit gaudy to me, but there is no mistaking that this is the 1911 A1 version of their handgun. You can see it has nice double diamond checkered wooden grips. I think these look very good. And in the middle is the Iver Johnson owl logo. And flipping the pistol around to the left-hand view, we can see that Iver Johnson marking that I mentioned a moment ago. We can also see the standard GI slide stop and a standard GI safety. And this pistol is what I would say is a 1911 A1-ish pistol, but I'm going to talk about some of the specifics where it does deviate somewhat from the profile of the actual 1911 A1. So before I get into all the X's and O's with this pistol, I did want to point out that in terms of overall appearance, other than the markings perhaps, it does meet the goal of the handgun that I was looking for a couple of years ago, that being a basic plain Jane 1911 chambered for the .38 Super cartridge that harkens back to the G-Man era. So that's something that I do like about this handgun. I just wish the markings were different. So starting the top-down look at this 1911 A1, the first thing that I'm going to point out is something that deviates from the actual 1911 A1 pistols as manufactured back during the day. The sights, as you see, are somewhat larger and more visible than we see on the standard service pistols. The front sight that you can see here, if I can keep it in focus, doesn't have any kind of markings or serrations to keep down glare or anything else, but the sights themselves are more highly visible than we would typically see on a standard government issue 1911 A1. Another slight, albeit functional, deviation from the standard 1911 A1 pistol is the fact that the ejection port is lowered. I'm not complaining about that. I'm also not really complaining about the sights. I would rather have sights that are a little bit more visible, but that is something that I wanted to point out as a deviation for all the 1911 purists out there. Now, in keeping with the original design, we can see that there are only rear serrations on the slide, and I was glad to see that. I don't need front serrations on this type of a handgun, so that's another thing that I particularly like. We also see the 1911 A1 style grip safety here with the elongated tang. We can see the scallops in the side of the frame here, which is also 1911 A1, and the short, or at least short-ish trigger that is in this pistol. So all of those are proper features for a 1911 A1. But the biggest deviation that jumps out when I look at this pistol is the fact that it has a flat mainspring housing. Now, I've mentioned in the past, I am one of those strange individuals who actually prefers the arched mainspring housing. That probably goes back to the fact that my original training on these handguns was when I was in the Marine Corps, and our 1911 A1 pistols all had that arched mainspring housing. So this just never feels quite right to me, and I always prefer that arched mainspring housing. Also, we see that there is no lanyard loop on this pistol, which these days is probably somewhat superfluous, but still I kind of like seeing that on any pistol that's going to identify itself as a 1911 A1. Now, when it comes to dimensions, this handgun is in typical 1911 A1 configuration. All of the lengths, widths, etc. are exactly what you would expect, and I'm not even going to go into them. They are recorded in any number of sources. If you're not familiar with the dimensions of this handgun, you can look them up, but I will just say it is in standard government issue configuration. One thing I was curious about was the weight of this handgun. Since it's chambered for the .38 Super cartridge, it does have a smaller bore diameter than the standard 45 ACP version of this pistol. So the weight on this handgun with no magazine in place is coming in at 40.8 ounces, so almost 41 ounces. I'll go ahead and include the magazine and see what the weight changes to with that. So with the magazine installed, that increases the weight to 43.1 ounces, so it does add just a little bit with that magazine. And in case you're curious how that compares to the 45 ACP version, I'll put that on the scale with the magazine installed, and it's coming out at 38.8 ounces. So that's how much difference that larger bore makes when it comes to the weight of these handguns. Also, in case you're curious, Tezos did a great job with these handguns, and you can see the difference as soon as I focus the camera a little bit there. In the sights that I was talking about before, this is much closer to the actual 1911 A1 sights that we had on our pistols back during the 1980s. And for anyone who doesn't know, that's the arched mainspring housing that I was talking about before, and it just adds a little bit more to the grip of the handgun that I feel when I'm holding it than I do with the flat mainspring housing as we have on the Iver Johnson pistol here. The finish on the Iver Johnson 1911A1 is a dark gray, almost black parkerizing, or at least it appears to be parkerizing. It looks pretty good, but also I can see some places, and I will try to bring this in so you can see it. I'm not sure if the lighting is going to allow you to see these worn areas or not, but I can see some areas where this finish is already starting to show some wear. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this pistol was used by Hot Munitions in their testing, so it has been handled, it has been fired, and it does show some signs of that. So this finish is not impervious to some blemishes. Again, there's a mark there. There's some wear marks along the sharp edges of this handgun. So this finish is not going to look absolutely perfect forever and ever and ever. As you use these handguns, they are going to show wear. One thing that I was happy to see is this does have the standard GI style recoil system. I've mentioned in past videos that the older I get, the less tolerant that I am of full-length guide rods. I don't think they do anything other than add weight to the handgun and complexity to the assembly and disassembly. So I much prefer the standard John Browning design recoil system, and that's what this pistol has. The safety on this Iver Johnson pistol is not bad. It's a little gritty or a little rough, but mostly positive. I have felt worse safeties on some far more expensive handguns, so that's not bad at all. We can also see that the top, if I can get it in focus, top of the slide stop there does have some grooves. They are very fine grooves. They are somewhat functional. I can feel those a little bit with the ridges of my thumbprint, but it doesn't feel quite like the standard GI slide stop that I remember from our pistols back when I was in the Marine Corps. This pistol has a grooved magazine release that you can see right there, and the grooves are pretty deep. I can definitely feel that gripping my thumb as I try to actuate it. Also, looking at the magazine well, we can see slight beveling to the sides. This is another departure from the actual 1911A1 pistols. We did not have any kind of beveling on the magazine well of our handguns. And as I said before, this pistol does come with a stainless steel 9-round magazine. The only marking is the Iver Johnson logo, so I'm not entirely sure who makes this for them. But we'll find out when we get to the range how well it functions, and I'll take a few other magazines along as well. And looking down through the ejection port, we can see that this is a standard 1911 configuration 2-piece ramp. We see the frame feed ramp there, and the barrel up above it. This is not a ramped barrel, so that part is standard 1911. Disassembly and reassembly of these Iver Johnson pistols also, not surprisingly, is standard GI. They can be disassembled and reassembled very easily with no tools whatsoever. And I'm not going to demonstrate the disassembly and give YouTube an excuse to demonetize this video, but I did want to show you the machining inside the slide here a little bit, which all appears to be pretty clean. In fact, it does remind me a lot of a GI 1911. And I will put this handgun back together and we'll take a look at the trigger. Subjectively, the trigger on this Iver Johnson pistol is pretty good. I'm going to weigh this here momentarily. It feels a little better than the typical GI 1911 trigger. I'm not feeling any detectable pre-ignition movement, i.e. creep of the trigger. and maybe just a touch of over travel, but certainly not enough to complain about. Let me grab my trigger pull gauge and we'll see exactly where that trigger is breaking. Okay, so I've got the trigger pull scale ready. Let's see what kind of pull weight we have here, and I'll try to keep this turned so you can see it. Sometimes that's a little bit of a challenge. 3 pounds, 15.2 ounces. Not bad at all, coming in at under 4 pounds for that first pull. Let's try it again. A little heavier that time, 4 pounds, 5.9 ounces. Let's try one more for a 3-pull average. £4 pounds, 2.7 ounces. So our average for those is 4 pounds, 2.6 ounces. So not bad at all for an untuned factory trigger, coming in at just over 4 pounds on average. Another feature of the trigger that you can see here is it does have a grooved face. Now our pistols that were issued back in the day had a checkering on the face of the trigger, but Iver Johnson decided to groove this one, which still should be perfectly functional when it comes to shooting this handgun. So that's going to do it for the up-close shop review of this Iver Johnson 1911 A1 pistol. Now I am going to break from my usual protocol today and not go directly out to the range for the shooting portion of this video. Reason being, it's currently 12 degrees here and snowing heavily outside, so I'm going to wait for a nicer day for the test firing of this pistol, but I did want to get the shop review up and out of the way so when that nicer day comes around, I can get out and just get to shooting and see what this pistol will do. So that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, if you purchase anything from Optics Planet, be sure to use my discount code, which is... And if you use that discount code, it'll save you 5% off your purchase from Optics Planet. Also remember the discount code from Hot Munitions. If you go to Hot Munitions, you can use my discount code there, which is HRFUNK10, and that'll save you 10% off your purchase from Hot Munitions. Thanks a lot, folks, and until next time, good shooting. Bye-bye.